Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another live stream. Today, we are talking about different kinds of lighting for artists. If you want to nerd out about art, Art Prof has everything you need from tutorials to critiques to a community of fellow art nerds. Clara, how about you get us started with light?
Yeah, we have several streams already that talk about the nuts and bolts of lighting, specifically shadows and also highlights. We're not going to go over that today because what we're going to show you is some of the differences between natural light and also artificial light. And it gets a little bit tricky because knowing these nuts and bolts, it's very helpful. But I think what you guys will find in today's slideshow that it all depends on the very specific situation. There's nothing you can always rely on when it comes to lighting. So what we want to do is talk to you about some of the differences and what you should carefully look for in the images. Right, Kat?
I don't know what you want me to say. We're just going to see a lot of hot white men that Clara loves in this slideshow.
I restrain myself. They're not on every slide. They're just on a few. So, Kat, what we have here is sort of the stereotypical natural lighting situation, stereotypical artificial light situation. How would you describe those typical situations?
I feel like a lot of people think that natural light would be more diffused. The shadows might be softer. The whole environment changes with the natural light, and also the light is cool. But also, people would think that artificial light would be the opposite, that the light and the shadows would be harsher in comparison to natural light, and also that the light will be warmer. But the thing is that they can switch around, and so you can never truly be sure. Like in this example, we have natural light being very harsh, very contrasted, and the artificial light a little bit more diffused. So it's actually harder to tell.
And then sometimes you can do, it's hard for me to focus, Kat. That's why they're not on every single slide. So we've got natural light on the left-hand side looking soft and subtle. But you can see, depending on the time of day and even the direction of the light, which is coming from behind, is high contrast and very dramatic. So a lot of this is almost like you have to be a little bit of a detective when you look at these scenes. You have to break them down, ask yourself things like, okay, what is the light source? Is the light source a computer screen? Is it the sun? Is it a street lamp? And then you have to say, is it indoors? What's the time of day? I'm just trying to find reasons to stay on this slide. That's okay. We've got this one.
Gosh, another one. Okay.
Oh, he's so cute, Kat. Come on. He's so pretty.
I know of him. I don't even know his name. I've seen him around.
Eddie Redmayne. I'm so disappointed.
Not my cup of tea. What can I say?
All right. So here we have artificial light looking soft and subtle, and then we have it high contrast and dramatic on the right-hand side. So really anything is possible in terms of lighting. Mm-hmm. So let's start out with the first category, which is natural light outdoors during the day. So let's start with this Anders Zorn piece. So Kat, how would you break down this scene in terms of lighting?
Well, it's very warm, so I assume it's a hot or warm day, and I also see dappled light coming through tree branches, and that already gives me it's a huge giveaway that this is outdoors and this is daytime, because normally you would see this kind of like all-encompassing warm light with the tree shadows outside in the day.
Yeah, and the thing is, in this painting, most of the painting is the figure. You don't really see the tree. I feel like the tree and the landscape, they're hinted at through the cast shadows, and you can see that through the speckling. So I would just recommend to all of you, if you're really trying to train your eye to identify lighting situations, look at any image that has light and try to find little clues. Like, what are some clues here in this illusionist still that tell you what type of lighting we're dealing with here, Kat?
Well, we see a very dramatic cast shadow from the building, and we can also see from the sky it is bright out. So, very clearly, this is a daytime situation with natural lighting. But what I also found really cool about this image is that it shows both artificial and natural light at the same time, leading one to differentiate between the two lights.
Yeah, and that's actually really hard to do. That was actually an assignment I used to give to RISD freshmen to make a drawing that had both artificial and natural light sources in one, and they could not do it. It was really, really hard because
Mm.
you had to find the right situation and balance them out. It's very, very difficult to do that all in
Mhm.
one. Tell us about this. This is a crazy still from Paprika, which is a Satoshi Kon film.
Right. So I almost wanted to include this slide into the artificial light during the day section of this slideshow because everything is just so saturated and it feels like it's so unnaturally saturated. Like I assumed that maybe there is just like an unnatural light source coming from multiple places. But in the end, I just feel like everything is so saturated to the point that maybe this can be read as daytime natural lighting in Paprika specifically. So you got to understand that although lights have certain rules that every work follows, sometimes people can manipulate light so that it looks very different from, say, like a film still from The Matrix, as an example.
Tell us in the chat, do you have a specific lighting situation or even time of day that's your favorite? Do you tend to like lighting that's very dramatic and theatrical, or do you prefer something that's a little bit softer or more subtle? Because I think about lighting, Cat, and I just cannot envision doing anything that looks representational that does not address lighting, because lighting really affects mood, story, color. It's like, how can you live without it? Think about a movie that had no lighting crew. Like, what would they
Right.
do?
I mean, it's like indicative that light is important when a film has a specific lighting crew. Like you actually have people trained to be professional lighters, which gives an idea of how important this role is.
And if you guys ever go online there's this massive photography store. It's like the Amazon of photo and film, B&H, which is in Manhattan. There is so much lighting equipment on that site. You just cannot believe it. And
Mm.
I think that it's this universe of skills that I think people don't think about, because when it's working well, you don't really notice. But when you take it away, it's like everything just falls to pieces. So,
Mhm.
Kat, tell us about this set of illustrators. I'd never heard of them before, actually.
Yeah, so I actually encountered these set of illustrators when I was working at a tech company because they just and Olivia Ceballos, I think, have worked with a variety of clients from tech companies to editorial to TV animation. And they're twins and they work together, which blows my mind. I can't imagine working with a family member. But anyways, what's wonderful about their work is that their lighting is so on point. Like we see a lot of complementary color schemes that come from their lighting. We also see lighting that sort of just makes a whole image into one color, but still works because light affects color as well. And they just have such a good grasp on both outdoor, indoor lighting and natural lighting as well, to the point where everybody wants to hire them for their images.
We have this comment here from Lisa who says, if you turn on a light inside your house during the day, it's nearly invisible. Natural light is so strong. I'm really glad you brought that up, Lisa, because how powerful a light is really does affect things. And you're right, natural light, nothing can compete with natural light. It's just so prominent and such a force. I don't know, do you have a preference, Kat? Natural, artificial, or does it not matter to you?
I do like natural light, but I actually have been paying more attention to night light recently, especially if it's natural night light, because there's something really beautiful about subtle moonlight, especially, in films such as Moonlight. We see some lovely use of natural light and light that subtly changes the color so that the image just becomes more powerful.
Vash the Stampede says, I felt dramatic lighting was easier to see when I first started learning. I think that's a really good point, and I felt the exact same way, that oftentimes if I didn't have very dramatic lighting, it was very hard for me to figure out, okay, where's the highlight, where's the shadow? But I think the more experience you get, the more you start to notice subtleties. Like reflected light is something that I've talked a lot about in some of the streams. And I've had students say to me in class, I don't see it. What are you talking about? And it's like, it takes time to train your eye. All right, let's talk about natural light, specifically outdoors with sunsets. So tell us about A Cat in Paris, Kat.
Right. A Cat in Paris is a lovely French animated film. I recommend you guys check it out. It's very much for kids. Like, it's kid-friendly and adult-friendly, therefore. But what I love the most about A Cat in Paris is just their really dramatic lighting. Like, their natural lighting and their artificial lighting is extremely high contrast, as we can see later in the slideshow as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think the way the shapes in this particular still, the highlights on the figures, the way they pop against that like very soft, very slow gradient. I mean, these are just so beautifully composed. Trent says, one of my pet peeves is older movies that use filters to make daytime look like night. Yeah, have you guys, tell us in the chat, what movie have you seen where the lighting was just wrong? Have you seen movies like that, Kat, where you're like, oh, this looks so fake? And like 9 times out of 10, it's because the lighting is bad.
I can't really pinpoint exactly one film, but I've actually seen like Twitter threads compiling different lighting scenarios from different films, and it shows like a lot of honestly like stereotype and racism when filming in different countries. Like they will put a filter over certain scenes to make that country look quote unquote grungier or, you know, less developed and stuff like that. So I've actually seen stuff like that on Twitter.
That's obnoxious. I didn't
It's
know that they
terrible.
did stuff like that.
Well, they don't tell you in the film, they just show you and you're just like, well, yep. But, you know, when people point it out to you, you're like, oh my gosh, that's terrible and so obvious, and I hope people stop doing that.
Yikes. Or another example I would say is anytime something is green screened, you know, when like somebody's driving in the car and the lighting doesn't match the footage that's behind them, like that's a big issue. And so I think a big part of making good, effective lighting situations is being consistent. Can you explain, Kat, what I mean by that?
Consistency in light. Sorry, I'm like reading comments at the same time. I missed your question.
Yeah, well, sort of like the green screen example where you've got one lighting situation on the figure and a different lighting situation in the back.
You know, there's a thin line, there's a balance here, because sometimes you see lighting that doesn't quite work naturally, but like in your mind you're like, that doesn't work, but your eyes are like, oh, but it's beautiful, and it contrasts the character from the background so well. Like this, I'm able to see the character. If it were lit differently, I wouldn't even be able to see the character. So you have to be a little bit careful. You have to push believability just a little bit so that it's fake but still believable, but not over the top so that people are like, I don't understand this and I don't want to understand it.
Yeah, it depends on the situation. I mean, if you're doing an oil painting, that's a very different thing than if you're doing a movie. But I think no matter what you're making, a film, a painting, a comic, ultimately what you're trying to do is build a world that's believable. And so as long as you set whatever, quote, rules you want to make for that world, if you're consistent about that, and that includes lighting, that usually is pretty effective. Okay, natural light, speaking specifically about outdoors at night. Now, I'm curious, Kat, why you are fascinated by nighttime, because I remember you did a drawing in my class that was so subtle, and it was this very quiet, beautiful narrative. Is this something new, or have you always been into that?
I think I was putting together this slideshow, and that made me realize that I was drawn to natural light during night situations. I think it's because not a lot of people think about it. Just when people think of night, they think dark. And they don't necessarily think like, oh, there can be subtle light in a situation like this. And I think it's because people don't think about it much, which makes me more attracted to it, you know?
Well, I think you have to work harder in a nighttime situation. Because if you have dramatic lighting and it's like really obvious highlight and shadow, it's very clear cut. But I think what's harder in lighting is to make the forms in the shadow have dimension. Because what I see a lot in paintings or drawings is people go, oh, it's a shadow. Okay, it's almost like paint bucket tool, make it black. But the thing is, if you look at this still, that's not the case. I mean, there's actually a lot of information on the left-hand side, even though it's all in shadow.
Right, yeah, and you guys can see the subtle shadows in, like, the building versus the figure versus the tree. Shadow, when we talk about light, we inevitably have to talk about shadow as well. You cannot just talk about one or the other.
Let's take a look at this manga, Streak of Chalk. Can you tell us, Kat, what's going on in this comic in terms of light?
Be a little picky and say, this is not manga, this is a bande dessinée. Well, not even a bande dessinée, this is actually a Spanish comic. So, like, what is the word for comic in Spanish? Does anyone know? But anyways, yeah, this is a Spanish comic, and Streak of Chalk takes place on an island in the middle of the ocean. And it has a lot of wonderful scenes, both night and day, of the ocean and of this, like, little island in the middle that looks like a streak of chalk, basically, on a black ocean. What I really love about this page is just, like, how subtle the darks are. Just sometimes Michelangelo Prado pushes a dark, like, in the middle top panel, but sometimes he will also show us, like, the whites of the foam and the waves in the bottom panel. Yet you still read that as night.
Vash the Stampede says, natural light at night is pretty, but I wouldn't know how to start painting it. Do you have any tips for that, Kat?
I would actually try to observe how other artists do this kind of thing. So in this example with Michelangelo Prado's Streak of Chalk, we can see how he's actually pushed the shadows and the colors to be able to still read as nighttime, even though you don't get a totally clear sense of where the light is coming from, you know? I would also recommend watching films that have night scenes, such as Moonlight, or if anyone has any other suggestions. But after having watched these films and seen these images, try then to see light in night yourself. You need somewhere to start. So these are the works you can start with. And then you can try to see it by yourself and then paint it or draw it by yourself as well.
I think what I would recommend is you have to realize if you're painting a dark scene, you're working with a really narrow range of value, because typically if you have a full range, you can go all the way to bright white and dark. But the thing is, it's like your value range, you only get to use like 25% of it. So little shifts in value become much more important, and you have to start seeing those differences.
Another thing about these particular lighting situations is that you don't totally draw them as you literally see them. You know, sometimes you have to push the light a little bit or make it just a little bit darker than you actually see it so that it reads well in an image. So there are times where you have to just like draw exactly what you see. And then there are other times where it's like, oh my gosh, it's just a little bit too dark for me to just draw exactly what I see. So I will push the light just a hint, just a smudge, you know?
Neil is asking, is there a way to paint night scenes from life? How will the setup look? Oh, it's such a pain in the butt. I mean, you can do it, but you have to have multiple light sources. And I think it was Deepti, actually, when she was in my freshman drawing class. I think she did a drawing of the laundry room that was in the basement of one of the dorms. And the light source she used was the light source in the hallway that was spilling into the laundry room. And I think she sat herself in the corner and had like a little tiny light, like just enough so she could see her drawing. But it's a pain because you can't illuminate the space to see your drawing really well, because then you're going to lose all of those tones. So that's where, like Kat said, you can't always just draw literally what you see. Oftentimes you're going to have to beef up the value, even though you don't see it. All right, let's talk about natural light underwater. You guys probably think we're crazy for putting this in here, but really we were just trying to think about what are all the different situations that you might see light in. And I think light underwater is so surreal and strange, and it doesn't really follow any rules that I can
Right.
think of. I
Mhm.
don't know. Are there rules for this?
I think a lot of ways to portray natural light underwater ultimately is gonna have to be above light. Does that make sense? Light from above, because you're probably not going to get light from below unless you have an artificial lighting situation. But another thing about water is that the way water falls through the surface of the sorry, the way light falls through the surface of the water really depends on the type of water. So you could be in an ocean, you can be in a lake, you can be in a bathtub. These are very different water light situations.
And also, you have to ask yourself, where are you in the ocean? Are you in the deep
Mm,
sea? Are you
mhm,
2 inches from the surface? And so, I guess what we're saying is that, yeah, the lighting plays a role, but so much of it is really specific to the environment and point of view. And then you can say, well, what if you're swimming at night? Right? Like, that's a whole other situation in terms of lighting. And so, really, it comes down to a case by case situation. Maria says, what I learned studying the paintings, Europeans of Brazil, when they first began exploring here, is that natural light is different depending on where you are. They wrote that it was hard to get it. Yeah, have you noticed, Kat, every time I've traveled, I really notice how the lighting affects my mood because I went to Seattle a couple years ago. Tell me here in the chat, who here has been to Seattle? You probably know what I'm talking about. But they don't have bright sunlight in the morning. It's just this haze of fog. Everything's very subtle. And I just felt like I never really woke up when I was in Seattle because I was used to
mhm,
like shining sunlight. And it just made me feel like I was half asleep all the time.
mm, right. I've experienced that. Like, I once stayed a few days in Britain, and it's cold and gray there. It's terrible. Like, how do people live there? And you get some rare moments of sunshine, but essentially, you just never wake up throughout the day because the whole day is gray.
Ariel says, I used to go out in my car at night, make sketches, make notes about color and value, then do the paintings in the studio, pushing lights and darks, like Kat said. I think that's great, Ariel, because lighting is something you really have to experience it. I
Mm,
mean, yeah, it's nice to have photo references, but you think about being in a pool. I mean, nothing really replicates that except actually being there. So, how about this
mhm.
one? I love this image.
I was actually trying to find images from the previous manga we saw called Children of the Sea, and then I found this image and I was like, "Oh, that's scary. Where is that from?" One Punch Man. Oh, I totally recognize that. But I think the scene here is that there's like a tsunami approaching the land, and through the tsunami wave, you can see underwater monsters approaching.
Yeah, and I like how they almost feel like shadows in a
Mhm.
way. I mean, maybe those are shadows. I don't know, but there's a lot of bouncing back and forth in the
Right.
scene that I think is really, really cool.
So they're not shadows, they're silhouettes because they're in the wave. They're riding the wave to get to land to attack the people.
Okay, the science part of my brain can't quite process all of those things. James says, realists of refraction, reflection, waves, movement, and light from above. Yes, so many things to think about. And it's like when people tell me, oh, I don't need a background, I'm like, yes, you do. This is all very, very important.
I want to bring up this really interesting comment from Neil that says, "Kat, how do you depict natural versus artificial light in your dip pen style?" So I work in a very black and white style. There is no gray, so I sometimes have to resort to using spot black to show very dramatic lighting. When it's daytime, I don't usually use too much shadow, like sometimes a harsh shadow like under the chin when there's an overhead light or something like that. And also, I have to be careful where the direction of the light is coming from. If it's a sunset, then maybe I will have the light coming in from like this. So the shadows will cast like that. But if it's really artificial light, then I would tend to make it really stark. So if, for instance, like I have a lamp here, if I get close to that lamp, you see how the shadows get a lot more dramatic and darker. So I just have to be really selective about what I put into black and what I put into white. Sometimes I don't even need that much black. And then sometimes I use a lot of black and just very little white. So it depends. That's a great question, though.
All right, let's talk about natural light that occurs indoors. Most of the time, there's a window involved because otherwise, how are you going to have that natural light? But also, the window is part of the story. Like, this is a really big window. And so you get the feeling of the light just like flooding into the space. And so for me, I've never seen this film before, but this seems like a very loving, very positive scene. A lot of that's the colors, a lot of that is just the presence of the light. And then you look at this one, and this one has a similar feeling. I mean, it's from a totally different artist. But how do you describe the lighting here, Kat?
Actually, what's interesting is that, Clara, you said that the previous image and this image have similar feelings. But I feel like the last image, yes, this one, the light is more diffused. And then the next image, the light is really harsh and contrasted. Yet somehow they both feel warm and inviting. And I think it's because everyone here recognizes sunlight. Everyone here has seen sunlight do different things when it comes through a window. So we recognize both of these images as sunlight and associate it with a warm and happy scene.
I really like these comments. People are telling us about the different lighting situations that exist in different countries. So Octasia says New Zealand has all that, but with more different land shapes. A lot of films were made there for its setting. Starving Artist says Australia is bright light, hard shadows, and bright colors. So tell me in the chat, based on where you live, how would you describe the typical lighting situation? Because now that I live in Utah, things are very different. I feel like the sky grew. I don't know if that makes any sense. Like, the sky is bigger here, and therefore it affects my feeling of space, how I inhabit that space. It's strange the way that works.
So maybe in that
case, to talk about
it's more of space and light, not just light.
It's probably both, yeah. We have to talk about Vermeer because that's just a requirement if you're going to mention light. And Vermeer is so funny because I'm like, geez, you really were a creature of habit. Every painting is this one window. But you know what's incredible is that depending on the time of day, that window changes very dramatically. And if you look at all of Vermeer's paintings, you'll notice that even though it's the same window, each scene has a very different mood to it.
I think that even though it's a similar light, people have to understand that mood can be also created through like the color and the situation. And so this light can shine on a very calm scene of people riding in a train. You know, this light can also shine onto a murder scene, right? And like, depending on the situation, it calls for certain light, but you have to understand that some lights can light up different kinds of situations.
Ray says, light indoors reminds me of some of the Godfather scenes wherein it really does emphasize the mood and emotions of the character. Oh, absolutely. I mean, you can have the exact same set of actors in the same place, and if you change the lighting situation, it can tell a completely different story. So I would say, always remember that lighting is not just a visual effect. It says so much about story. I know for you, Kat, you think about that a lot in your stories.
Yeah. As a comics artist, you have to think about everything from like the writing to the characters, and light is no exception. I actually I made a comic once about a girl suffering from depression. It's called Encased. And there was a very important scene where a girl is sitting in her room and the light from the blinds makes rows of light onto her face. And I was trying to show through lighting that she was trapped, because there's something about film noir scenes with like blinds making rays of light on someone to show that they will be captured or they'll be jailed or they'll be encased in something similar to this. And I was using that light to sort of foreshadow that she was trapped.
All right, let's talk about artificial light when it's outdoors. And this is a slide coming up. It's got some flashing lights, So if anybody is sensitive to that, you probably want to look away for a few seconds. So I'm just going to give you guys a little bit of time to do that. But I think this category, Kat, gets really diverse in terms of the type of light. Because up until now, we've been saying, okay, daytime, nighttime, but it's all essentially the sun. Once you start getting outdoors and artificial light, it can be anything. Like this image is what? Basically a nuclear explosion, right? In Akira?
Uh-huh. And this is artificial light during daytime. Do you notice how the bright white light is obviously coming from the explosion? It is the artificial light. But notice how the directors have darkened the rest of the scene, even though it is a daytime moment, to make sure this explosion has been highlighted, that this is the brightest light, even brighter than the sun in this moment.
Yeah, and that initial bubble when it pops up, that light looks painful. It's so white and blue. There's something dramatic. And then do you see how it gets bigger? It gets a little bit darker as it grows. I mean, such a subtle thing, but it does change your perception of the image. And I guess, is this the aftermath?
No, this is just the comic version of what we just saw. So something we didn't mention in the GIF version is that there was a use of flat black. Like there was an instant pop of blue light, a black circle, and then instantly that bright white light expanding. So it might trigger people who can't handle flashing images, but it's also a really good portrayal of just like the chaos of light in an explosion.
10 Days for Cows says Calgary, Canada, big skies that have bold blue, purple, reds, or everything that is just gray like today. And Michael Ellison says, however, since we get fires every fall, North Bay, California, we can get weird orange lighting from the thick smoke from burning land and trees. Oh, did you see those images that the photojournalists were shooting of those fires in California over the past year? I mean, some of them look like the apocalypse.
I mean, I took a few myself because I also saw that orange, like garish orange light. Yes.
So let's talk about Prometheus.
Okay.
This is a really good example because sometimes the artificial lighting isn't even real artificial lighting. Sometimes you're a creepy looking android and you're in this pointless Ridley Scott movie that just went on and on and on, but you're sitting through it anyway because Michael Fassbender's in it. Actually, he doesn't look that good in this one because he's an android and he has blonde hair, and that's just wrong. I'm not okay with that.
Everyone has their cup of tea.
But I love this still because you see how cool the globe is, but then there's this like yellow light behind his neck. And then there's all this atmosphere around him. So I think what we're talking about here is imaginary light sources. So the thing is, light sources don't always have to exist in reality. They can be something that's a lot more exaggerated, or that comes from an object that doesn't even exist in real life. Okay, artificial light. Let's talk about outdoors at night. So we've got A Cat in Paris here again, and we've seen similar things in some of the other stills. But Kat, can you talk to us about those cars in the upper right?
I knew you would say that. I knew you would point out those cars.
How did you know I was going to say that?
I don't know. Just it spoke to me. I knew Clara would point that out. I've worked with you long enough.
Am I that predictable?
Yes. But you know, most people would focus on the big object of like the guy hanging onto the ledge and the really contrasted light on him. But then down below, we actually see the cars that are casting headlight light, right? So this light doesn't really inform any object. It just like lays on the ground, clearly artificial, doesn't have a big wide spread. But what's interesting here is that, first of all, it points out the cars are there. That's why they have the headlights on. Imagine those cars without the headlights. You wouldn't even know they were there. And then I forgot my second point. Well, anyways, those headlights show that those cars are there.
And then we have this one where we don't really know necessarily what the light source is, just looking at the still, but you know that the light is coming from below. And so these people are high up somewhere,
Mhm.
And so again, it's almost like you have to look at each lighting situation like a crime scene, like you're trying to piece together the situation. And so sometimes it's like the position of the light matters.
Mhm.
Is it from above? Is it from below? Because that really influences things quite a bit. This is a photographer who shot all these just very haunting images. And I don't know exactly what the scene is, but this is all artificial. I don't know if these are solar flares. Maybe somebody here in the audience can identify it. But what's your take on these lights? Because they're very surreal.
Maybe they are just flares, as you said, or maybe they are fireworks, but I really I hope they aren't something like explosions or anything. They don't seem very explosive. They do seem they're like traveling in like one direction. So I hope they aren't anything lethal.
And now we've got Akira because, oh my gosh, the city. It's I've seen this movie before. It's gross. I can't watch that one scene with all the muscles. I have never been like thoroughly like felt like I was gonna throw up after watching an animated film. It's really intense. But oh my god, like the city. I mean, I feel like the only other movie that competes is like Blade Runner.
Blade Runner, maybe Metropolis, honestly. It's like not the same how do I say this? It's not like a high-tech city like Akira and Blade Runner, but Metropolis has a lot of these like dramatic light sources that Metropolis, both the live action film and honestly also Metropolis, the animated film, which is a very different storyline. They both have really dramatic like Metropolis lighting. But oh my gosh, we can't not talk about Akira when it comes to artificial light at night. There are vehicles, there are buildings, there are cityscapes. Just the way the artificial light is designed in each of these scenes gives a certain mood for each nighttime scene, and it also provides a design element throughout each of the scenes, like what we saw previously with the motorcycle light going through the composition. I think it's just genius use of artificial light.
And this one, do you see how the headlights of the cars move you through the space?
Mhm.
Because it starts in the lower right-hand corner, that's the big one. There's one in the middle ground, and then there's one in the way back. And the lights really stand out because everything else in the entire scene is way darker. And so lighting is also, in some ways, a method with which artists can create a sense of space and depth.
Mhm. Here is a scene from Tokyo Godfathers, which is my favorite Satoshi Kon film of all time. And we have this angel who's like radiating artificial light. And because of that artificial light, you actually see like this tight alleyway, this tight and very messy alleyway. So, and then it fades away, and then you just get like a silhouette of this space. So, it's an excellent use of artificial light to highlight this space.
And now let's talk about artificial light that's indoors. I think oftentimes it can have a very quiet, very intimate mood. Like we have this, I'm going to assume, Mother and Child here by Jesse Wilcox Smith. Although this is eerie. I've never seen this movie before, but I love this stuff. Oh my God, this is just so intense. What's going on here, Kat?
Uh, Considering if it will be a spoiler. So, of course, they're like apprehensive. They hear something mysterious in the middle of a garbage dump, which they're foraging for useful things that they can use. Um, and actually, what they find is a baby. And you know, the instant they find that baby, the light changes to become a lot warmer and the baby's like glowing almost. So, right now, this lighting situation is very apprehensive because the director wants you to feel apprehensive like, what's in the middle of the dump? Like, what are they hearing? What if they get hurt? Right. But then once they find that grand reveal, the lighting totally changes.
I also think that backlit figures is something that a lot of people don't want to do because I think the assumption usually if you have a figure in an image, oh, the figure is probably pretty prominent. You're going to want them to be well lit. But if you look at this, you really start to group the figures just as like a clump of people. You know, I mean, I think it's a really brilliant move because the people almost disappear amongst the silhouettes of the bags of garbage. And you can see it's a very narrow value range in the people, but it creates this very bold visual effect. I feel like I'm seeing this more and more, Kat, screens as lighting situations. Are you seeing that too?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're inundated with screens all the time. We use screens all the time to work with an art prof. So it would make sense we see them in artworks nowadays.
Right. Or I love this one, which is like the neon sign. And I think we all have associations, late night diner and grungy city in the middle of some film. And so I think it's just really fun to look at a lot of these stills and to ask yourself, like, where is that lighting coming from and how is it affecting what's going on in the scene? How does it impact the story? Because I think we should talk about candles for a while, Kat. What do you think?
Okay. What do you want to say about them?
I'm busy doing something else. I'm busy just soaking in the visuals. If you guys want to see great candlelight, though, look at Georges de la Tour. He has amazing candlelight, and I feel like every Jane Eyre, Jane Austen movie is like a ripoff of a Georges de la Tour film. So check it out. Oh, he just looks so intense here. I like it when he's mad. I like it when he feels tortured.
Question from Neil, getting you back on track, Clara. Let's answer this question. Saying, aren't candles considered natural light? Well, fire is a natural element, but I think when we say natural light, we really mean daytime or nighttime and a big all-encompassing light coming from the sun and or the moon, right?
Slept says Prof Lieu's flame. Good job. I love that. Oh my God, so good. All right, so the last category we have is artificial light in a theatrical situation. And this is so interesting because when something's in the theater, it's a totally different world in a way. Who here has seen a live Broadway show? I mean, Kat, I saw Hugh Jackman on Broadway. It was in the 2000s.
How many
did the boy
come up in the stream?
It's relevant. Okay. He was in this Broadway show. I just feel like when I've watched live Broadway shows, I feel like I'm stepping into this incredible universe. It's like you're in a movie. The lighting is so prominent and usually really exaggerated, but oftentimes that's what you need to tell that story.
I really want to see a Broadway show live one day. I heard that Hamilton was released on Disney Plus or something, but it really cannot beat the live experience.
Absolutely. Ray says, some of the awesome horror psychological games I've played did set the mood for me, and lighting make me feel scared than all those jump scares. Oh yeah, video games are getting so intense now. Like I kind of can't believe how immersive they are. I mean, at least compared to the pixel stuff that I grew up with. Okay, how about these scenes from Farewell, My Concubine?
So I've actually never watched this film, but I was looking specifically for scenes with Beijing opera performers because, oh my gosh, of course you're going to have like theatrical lighting, but with all the makeup, the costume, the jewelry, and the way all of these things reflect the light, like look at how that blue light reflects on the jewelry versus reflecting on the face. I think that Beijing opera performers and lighting situations are a really great example of just theatrical light.
They're just so over the top. I mean, I think another good example, if anybody here has seen that Moulin Rouge movie by Baz Luhrmann, it's got Nicole Kidman and Ewan McGregor. There's some crazy lights and costumes, and it's just everything bouncing off of each other. It's really quite amazing. So we have other streams where we break down the nuts and bolts of lighting that you can all check out later. And this Google slideshow is available. So if you want the link to that, it's in the YouTube video description below. And it is also on our main site, artprof.org. Artprof has a podcast. It's available on Spotify and also on iTunes. And in a few minutes, Kat and I will be hanging out in the Artprof Discord. We will be in the post live streams channel. I can only hang out for about 10 minutes because I have to head out to do a voice session with the Patreon supporter channel.
Really fast, I want to give a shout out to Jill for the super sticker. Thank you very much. As you guys know, your support helps us keep running and keeping arts education free and accessible for all. So thank you, Jill.
Subscribe to our channel so you can continue to grow and develop as an artist. And thank you so much to our top Patreon supporters for giving us the resources that we need to stay up and running. You guys do so much for us. We would not be here without you. Everybody, thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye.